Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Beautiful. I'm Anthony, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to kind of add this new segment to my channel because it's something that I'm very interested in, I'm very passionate about. When I started doing Life is Beautiful, I kind of had a little slogan, a little catchphrase, and that was, there's a story in every bottle. And I do 100% truly believe that's the case. I believe every single beer out there has a unique and interesting perspective and story that most people don't know or haven't taken the time to look into. So today I want to do one that I found that I think is incredibly interesting. That is Samuel Adams Boston Lager.
Samuel Adams Boston Lager, the first beer that I made and still my favorite. You can look at this beer and see the malt body in it. It's got a beautiful amber color. It's got a little bit of red in it, a lot of gold. It obviously pours with this big, rich, thick head. Aroma is beautiful. It's the signature aroma of noble hops, the heirloom hops of the German lager brewing traditions. Boston Lager is the best example I can give you of the attributes of a great beer. It's got a lot of flavor, yet it's very balanced.
Boston Lager is an award-winning recipe that dates back to the 1860s, coming in at 4.8% ABV and ranging somewhere along the style guidelines between like an amber lager and a Vienna lager. The Boston Lager is an absolutely delicious beer. And you can tell that a lot of time, care, and passion went into it. The founder, Jim Koch, he flies to Bavaria every single year and personally tests the hops still to this day. It's a proprietary yeast strain, and they have a proprietary malting process that allows them to basically extract the exact characteristics that they want out of the malt specifically for Boston Lager. It's all this attention to detail and all this perfection and fine-tuning and tweaking that has made it the best-selling craft beer of all time. It's so dang good that this beer alone has basically helped Samuel Adams, the Boston Beer Company, gain a total of 1% of the entire beer market. That's pretty extraordinary. But before it rose to the fame it did start off in very, very humble roots. Boston Beer Company founder Jim Koch quit his very lucrative consulting job in order to brew beer. He came from a very long lineage of master brewers, and he wanted to be one to, in some way, carry on the family legacy. He did consult with his brewmaster father to go over the business plans, and his father was initially against the idea. However, after a little more discussion, Jim's father led him up into the family's attic, and there in the corner was a little box. And inside that box was a recipe dating back to the 1860s that belonged to Jim's great-grandfather. Jim's father said that if you were going to risk everything to brew beer, it might as well be the right beer. Jim initially started brewing several test batches of this recipe in his kitchen sink. To very little success, had a couple of off-flavor problems, had a couple of bottle bomb issues. None of that failure in any way dissuaded him. It only encouraged him. Jim started searching around the area to find a local brewery that he'd be able to run test batches on a commercial system for. This was an incredibly difficult task because at the time, breweries were not really fit for what this recipe called for. They needed to learn how to handle krausening. They needed to learn how to do decoction mashes. And it was a lot of tiny little details like that that most breweries at the time were not ready, equipped, or even knew how to do. So Jim knew he had to do something else as well, and that is find somebody who could guide him through the process and really help him fine-tune this recipe. He got in contact with Dr. Oedes, who is one of the most prolific men in the entire history of modern-day beer. Dr. Joseph Oedes was incredibly revered within the industry because he was the original inventor of the American Pale Adjunct Lager. His original recipe, through several business acquisitions, would eventually go on to become Miller Lite. Although initially uninterested, Dr. Oedes was eventually swayed because of Jim's interesting story, his business plan, and the idea of brewing something a little bit different, a little more unique, and bringing passion back into the American beer scene. So Dr. Oedes allowed Jim to come and brew the initial test batches on his pilot system. The initial batch, even under the supervision, didn't come out the best. Jim ended up writing to his investors that the batch wasn't actually useful for very much. However, during this process, he was able to learn enough about this beer and how to brew it that he thought that he'd be able to scale up and eventually move on to distribution, which is exactly what he started doing. With enough of the kinks worked out, Jim started contract brewing this beer out of someone else's brew space. The problem was, even if he was able to brew it successfully, Jim wasn't able to make any sales because he didn't have a strong enough brand name. His initial idea was to name the Cook family recipe after his grandfather. It was his grandfather's recipe after all. However, his grandfather's name was Lewis Cook, spelled Koch. And through enough life experience, Jim realized that people often mispronounced it. And he really didn't think that people would be interested in drinking a Lewis Koch lager. So his next idea was New World Lager. It kind of captivated what he was trying to do, bring an old German style recipe into the modern day American brewing scene. And plus there was a little bit of a local tie since there is a boat in the Boston Harbor that is a pretty big tourist attraction known as the New World. Still undecided, Jim reached out to a marketing firm and the best that they were able to come up with is the Sacred Cod Lager. Jim hated it. But Jim isn't afraid of getting his hands dirty. He took to the streets with several beers mocked up with different labels and names, and on the spot asked people on the street, his future potential customers, which beer they preferred, which name did they like the most. The majority did choose New World Lager, but Jim was still unconvinced. He wanted a beer name that would really exemplify what it is he was doing. He thought back to his school days where he was learning about the Revolution and the Founding Fathers, and his favorite one to learn about was, of course, Samuel Adams. Sam Adams was known for being a little bit of aggressive, a little bit of a rebel rouser, yet also being very intelligent, calculated, and meticulous.
Why name a beer after Samuel Adams? Because Samuel Adams signed the Declaration of Independence. He believed there was a better way to live. All men are created equal. They are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Smooth, flavorful. We bow to no kings. Samuel Adams, Boston Lager. Declare your independence.
Jim also loved the fact that Samuel Adams was a brewer and that he had learned to brew through a long lineage of family brewers as well. It seemed like a perfect fit. Samuel Adams, the man, represented everything that Jim Cook wanted his beer to represent. So it was decided. Jim had the name and he unveiled it 1985 on Patriots Day. The sales plan was very simple. Jim had a refrigerated briefcase that had his cold beers and 2 cups inside. That way, if somebody was interested, they couldn't turn him down because he was ready to let them test it on the spot. And Jim would go door to every restaurant and bar within walking distance that he could find. And he would go in, talk to the owner, pop up shop, and be like, try my beer. If you give it a try, I know you'll enjoy it. And many did. Jim made a lot of headway through education. Samuel Adams Boston Lager was one of the first teaching tools that beer could be something different besides fizzy yellow corn water. Jim would go over and he would describe the brown bottle and why it's better than the import's green and clear bottles. He would talk about the malt and he would talk about the hops and the dedicated process and how he oversaw every single batch. And that won a lot of people over. It really solidified what people thought of when they think about better beer. And that still kind of continues on to this day. And it all really started with Samuel Adams Boston Lager. In fact, that very same thing, where he walked in and just started chatting people up, eventually led to the term craft beer.
In the beginning, I described Samuel Adams with the phrase, America's only classic lager, on our hang tags and table tents, emphasizing the notion that I was bringing back an original recipe for beer and resurrecting classic American beer. While this was certainly true, I realized over the course of thousands of barroom conversations that the message wasn't clicking. People liked how our beer tasted, yet they saw the imports as way more classic or historic than anything in America could be. What good was a 19th century recipe against one that had been created in the 15th century? Heck, beer in Europe went back to the days of ancient Rome. One day I was talking to a guy who was a die-hard Heineken drinker. I was trying to get him to drink Samuel Adams, and he wasn't having it. How can your beer be any good, he asked. It's American. Everything in America is mass-produced by robots. No, I said. This beer is made in small batches, by human beings who really care about the beer, like me. I do it myself, throw the hops into the kettle at just the right moments. This is my beer. I'm proud of it. Taste it. That got his attention. An American beer that was handcrafted in small batches just felt good, evoking honest labor and a craftsperson who put his heart into the beer. Sounds like it's almost handmade, he said. And he ordered a Sam Adams. The story of my family and the 19th century recipe helped my cause, but it was this larger frame of careful, old-style, smaller-scale production that connected emotionally. In 1986, 2 years after starting up, we changed our table tents to read, handcrafted in small batches, putting that phrase both on our labels and on material delivered at the point of sale. This phrase crystallized the identity of Sam Adams Boston Lager as a flag bearer for other craft brewed beers that were just then beginning to come onto the market. It was the first time the term craft had been applied to what was then called microbrewing, all from listening to a guy in a bar.
I personally don't know. That seems like a little bit of a stretch to me, but that's up for y'all to decide. Only 6 weeks of being on the market selling his beer, Jim Koch took it, loaded it up, and flew to Colorado for the Great American Beer Festival, where, to his and probably everyone else's surprise, he took home the #1 position of the best beer in America. This award gained massive amounts of attention for the Boston Beer Company, and it's really the starting point of what's launched his phenomenal, astronomical rise to success and market dominance. But even more interesting than that is that it allowed him to catch international attention. A German import businessman had reached out to Jim and said, "I want to sell your beer in Germany." Everyone was a little bit confused. How was an American going to be able to sell their beer in one of the greatest beer producing countries in the entire world? After some thought, Jim said, "You know what? Let's do it. Let's send the beer there." It was the first commercially sold beer in Germany. That's pretty freaking cool. Boston Lager would go on to win a ton of accolades and a bunch more awards over the next decades, but being the first one in Germany was incredibly important, and it really showed the world good beer can be brewed in America. Jim was always looking for ways to better the Boston Lager. How could he make this better? He designed a proprietary method of toasting his malts. He had specialized yeast strains made, hand-chosen hops. Additionally, they designed a specialized glass specifically for Boston Lager, which was the first time that a glass had ever been specialized for a particular beer.
This glass took me a year of work and 3 PhDs, 2 in sensory science and 1 in materials engineering. And the idea was very simple. It comes from wine. Everybody knows that if you have a really great wine, you're not going to just drink it out of the bottle or pour it into a juice glass. You're going to put a great wine into the proper glass that enhances the flavor. And of course, if it's true for wine, it's true for beer. The glass does affect the taste of the beer, so I set out to develop the perfect glass for Samuel Adams Boston Lager in particular, and in general for rich, flavorful beers. And the result of a year of work and a lot of serious drinking is this Samuel Adams glass. And it has a number of features that enhance the flavor of a really good beer. It's kind of starting from the top. There's an internal bead at the top. We call that the turbulator, because the turbulator creates turbulence as the beer enters your mouth, and that turbulence pushes flavor out of the beer just as the beer enters your mouth. The lip is turned outward because for a flavorful beer, you want to be able to taste the malt body. And that outward lip puts the beer on the front of your tongue where the sweet taste buds are concentrated. And then the bowl of the beer is actually the same size and shape as a sommelier's glass, because this size and shape is the best one to capture and concentrate aromas. As we smelled earlier, you just get a better aroma out of this glass than that glass. And then it's meant to be held like this rather than, you don't hold it like that, you hold it like this, you put less heat into the beer, so the beer will stay colder longer. And then we take a laser and we etch into the bottom of the glass nucleation sites that will create bubbles that release flavor out of the beer all the way to the bottom of the glass.
What I'm trying to get at is that Boston Lager was really a trendsetter. It started so many initiatives that eventually became standard practice in the beer industry. Unfortunately, in recent years, Samuel Adams has kind of fallen off. It's not regarded as well, and it's not up on the pedestal that it once was. Although the Boston Beer Company as a whole does continue to grow, it is at an incredibly much slower pace. Several articles have even been written that describe Boston Lager as being the beer that the craft beer revolution passed by. And many drinkers nowadays regard it the same way they would a Yingling or even a Blue Moon. It's more of a gateway beer than a craft beer. The size of the company and its wide distribution also brings a lot of flack towards Boston Lager because people see it as being too big. And what's the difference between it and big beer? It seems to have lost that genuine connection, that handcrafted connection that it once had. And although I do completely understand these sentiments, I can't help but feel bad for it. This beer, it paved the way for so many others, and it did so many unique and interesting things that no one else ever can do. Boston Lager is one of the most important beers to ever be brewed. I do 100% believe that the entire beer industry would not be what it was, what it is, and what it will be without this beer. It was a high quality passion project that you just didn't see back then. And to be honest, you really don't see that much nowadays either. Its precedent for quality control and high quality ingredients set the standards for what the industry is today. It might not be as exciting or as flashy as a lot of modern day offerings, but it's an incredibly important chapter of beer history, and it had an incredibly interesting story that you needed to hear. So, thank you very much for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed. If you like this, please let me know so I can continue doing it. I'm already working on a couple more, and if there are any beers in particular that you want to know the story of, please let me know. I will do all the dirty work and all the research it takes to figure it all out. So, once again, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there's a story in every bottle, and that life is beautiful. Cheers.